Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Colton Rodgers. I'm a director of security here at Xeris. And with me today, good friend Matt Lee. He's the senior director of security and compliance at Pax8. He's also a board member of MSP CyberX. He's an ISC2 certified cloud security professional, an ISC2 certified information system security professional, a co-author of the MSP Owner's Handbook SASE Edition, as well as an all-around certified big brain haver and cultivator of an excellent chin main. Matt Lee, thank you for joining us here today.
And it's the chin main that I'm just the most proud of, brother, if I'm honest. And if I was introducing you, I would like add at the end, like, only dude that straight up goes into CIS controls with me as just a flavor of the month club. So like, yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate you being here. And it's the little things like CIS, yeah, Control 15.1 that really
It's
gets me
just a
up in the
bond.
morning. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
it's just a bond, man. We can't
It
shake
is.
it.
So, what we're looking to talk about today here and inform people on is really digital transformation and security modernization as a whole. Now, like these
Yeah.
have been buzz phrases for years, but what do you believe those phrases really mean for organizations from like a security standpoint?
I haven't published this yet because I don't know. I haven't, but I wrote an article that I was going to put on my blog about what I think this year is, and I really think this year is the year of haves and have-nots, Colt. And it goes along with what I wrote in that book with Juan Fernandez and Marnie Stockman and Wes Spencer. It is really that, like, there's a bit of a chasm forming. If you think about what modern tech looks like in the mid enterprise and small to mid enterprise and even enterprise world, you have this, like, if I was born yesterday, I'm probably identity centric. I'm probably using modern function services, platform services. I probably have a fairly modern CI/CD methodology. I have most of those things are kind of in built in. I may not even have Active Directory. I may not even live in an infrastructural world at all. If I do, it's infrastructure as code, or it's some
Mm,
methodology there for code producing entities, right? But I think the point is you have this like chasm forming. So when we talk about what were buzz phrases of, modernization and transformation is you, if you are living in this other world, and I'll go further to define this real quick because I think this
yeah,
matters. If I am that other company and I start up, let's say, and I'm identity centric, I'm using Okta, Ping, Microsoft, Google, whoever it may be as my identity center of,
sure.
center of authority, right? And then I'm extending that out through SaaS applications. I'm using, OAuth, or I'm using SAML. I'm extending that identity out in those spaces. It really is this centrism on identity over here. Okay, right, in that model. If I live in the other world, I'm very legacy in the way I have to approach that. I have different systems that have disparate methodologies of communication that depend on sometimes legacy protocols, legacy things that force me into a box that let me live in that world. And so transformation in the past would be like, I'll slowly get to that next service so I can get rid of that one little crappy server over there that I'd love to get rid of. Like, that was transformation. But your competitor's starting up with an identity centric space that is much more modern, that is much more centered around API capabilities. And there's flaws both ways. But I just feel like on this other side, you have a real separation of those capabilities. I think you have a separation of what the speed and agility are. And I use this story to help people understand this. Imagine I am going to go through, and I am speaking from an SMB or small to mid-sized business. So I'm being very simplistic,
Mm,
but it does apply in enterprise, and it does
translates.
apply.
Absolutely translates.
It translates, right? But if I was to start a new project and I say, listen, I want to get a new ERP as a small company, and I say, listen, MSP, can you, manage service provider, can you please tell me if I have enough resources on my server, or if I have enough already allowed at my infrastructure as a service platform? Can I spin up new resources? What do we have to do from a security perspective? Like, let's get that going. Okay. That's one model. And I have to go through all that planning. And they come back in 2 weeks and we're ready. We have the server. We bought the license. We were going to spin it up. We're now going to wait for the ERP provider to install their software. We're going to get that going. That's a model. And then it sucks. And you're $42,000 into the project and you're going to do it or you're going to bail. But it sucks. And it took you 2.5 weeks to 2.5 months to figure that out. The other side goes, I'd like to turn on dynamics. Please give me a license. Click. It's on. Let's plan it out. You could still take the same security timeline. Let's say that takes you a little bit of time, but even then, it's much more linear, I feel. And when you start talking about that now, a lot of those things are shared things, shared responsibilities that those third parties have to provide that they're going to be doing on your behalf. They're spinning up the infrastructure. They're doing the SaaS aspect of it, right? So when we're down that path, when you think about what that means for those companies, I can fail really quickly. If Dynamics sucks, I can turn it right back off, right? And I only took 2 days to 2 weeks to figure that out, not 2 months. And if you look at that, it's those that fail fastest that win. So I feel like there's not just a digital transformation component to that, but there's a security transformation. Instead of me having to figure out what patches can I apply today and which things can I really, for the most part, don't give a crap about that. I put them in an update ring that's very, very aggressive. I force a compliance policy. It forces of it. Most of them are endpoints. Now, I'm not getting into code producing entities, and we could get
Right.
very deep in that topic, but I just mean, in general, I think this year's the year of have and have nots, and it doesn't stop there. It gets into those that haven't focused on that posture, that don't know what their assets are, that don't have a framework they're adopting at a broad breadth or depth, and I can go on for days, but
Yeah. And
yeah.
yeah, going off of that, I think something we talked about previously was people that are focusing on, the beeps and boops versus people that are focusing on the data and the people.
Yeah, man.
Um, and I think
Yeah,
that translates well into that chasm that you're
it
really
does.
talking about, because it's really can be looked at that simply. And
Well,
along with that fail fast terminology, there's the time value of money spent in that. It's like, okay, 2.5 weeks on either side, 42 for the license on either side,
yeah,
but like, how fast is it going to take to roll that back? Okay,
yeah.
a day
Yeah.
versus, okay, now
It's
we
the
have all this
deletion of an
crap to clean up.
enterprise app and a request to delete my account and a really, I mean, it's very delineable, what that is, right? Versus
Yeah,
building a castle and then kicking it over. So, yeah.
I'd like to see the leg on the person that could kick over a castle.
It's true, it's true. It was a cannon, actually, if you remember.
Yeah.
It's what ended the castles.
uh, Awesome.
But actually, to iterate on what you said, for the people that haven't heard this before, of like that pivot back to this castle and moat methodology, like we used to think like that. I have a firewall, here's my servers, they're back on this VLAN, I've got them protected, like that's where it is, and nobody will come kick down my door because my firewall is super strong and my moat's really long, and right? But now you're living in a world where everybody's outside the castle, both figuratively and literally, right? They're working from home, they're working from Starbucks. Like, thank you to my wife also for bringing me my Starbucks, like really quickly and
Shout
secretly.
out.
Yeah, shout out. But yeah, and they're everything's changed. And so we haven't changed the way we think. But yet, in addition to that, we also thought security was looking at a beep that went off in my EDR tool, or my at that time malware, or anti-malware tool, or whatever it may be at the day and time. And instead of saying that beep and boop must mean something, it's tied to Colt. Colt has access to these things. This is the data that has access. Here's the extensibility of Colt. They haven't really thought to that identity centrism of, I don't care about the beeps and boops unless they tie into a person and a data stream and an access that matters, right? Those are the things that are
Mm,
that pivot. And I'm not trying to be simplistic or diminutive or negative about the existing way we think about things. It's always been, we're looking for malops. We're looking for, like, as opposed to this pivot to the identity centrism and access centrism and data centrism of what it really should be, is protecting the data, in my opinion.
right, right. And at one point it was sufficient, but like with everything moving to how it is now, it's not going to be sufficient, nor is it efficient at this point to
Sure.
be wasting time on that, because you're going to get people with alert fatigue, and that's just not going to be good for anybody at that point. But yeah, like as you're talking about the Starbucks, we'll bring them up real quick again. This podcast not sponsored by Starbucks,
Right,
unfortunately,
for
but
sure. We have to
reach
state
out.
that for FCC or FTC rules.
So people working from Starbucks, all this cloud adoption, how do you think that's reshaping security priorities of people like today? Not like how should they be, but
Sure.
what kind of push do you think that it's having on organizations today?
Well, and again, to take this have-nots conversation a smidge, right? Like, I think those that are already very identity centric are now focusing on the other aspects of access control that are deeper in my mind. Like, they're getting deeper into attribute-based access control. Is this device healthy? Like, you even see that with the token smith that just
Mm,
came out, right? Talking about, hey, we can now pretend like we're a device that's been bound in, tuned, and is healthy. Why? Because people are putting policies to do that. They're stopping it, right? They're doing those things. People are putting sassy edges on the front end that give access. And by that, I don't mean SaaS. I mean SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. They're
Mhm.
putting sassy edges or other types of ZTNA type architectures in place that make that even harder. That now they have to meet that condition to be able to use those resources, right? And so you're
Right.
seeing that pivot. But then taking it to the other direction, you actually now have what I think is the march of success or death for most. And I think it is those that live in that infrastructure. I own my own identity on this little AD server, and I love this little light of mine, and I'm going to keep it blowing all day, and it's going to be a great little candle, and right, and that's the way they live. And I am intentionally being pejorative of that statement, so I will make sure that's stated on the facts.
Yeah.
But I think that those that are there are trying to figure out what their digital transformation is without the buzzwords of like, how do I get out of this crap pile and
Mhm.
get over where I want to be? And I do believe most of them are identity trajectories. I think most of them are moving towards I am and one source of identity and CIS 5.6 and 6.7 centralization and SSO, right? And centralization of access control. And I think those things are playing out where they're not just some hodgepodge tool they tossed on top. They are a centric way of looking at it. I think the ones that'll succeed are. And so I think you see this that there's probably a lot of chaos in those companies in how do we convert? How do we still meet our current security and compliance mantras as we try to do these conversions and change? How do we make our change management work if they are that mature, right? How are they going through that? That's I think like a thematic aspect of that. And I've watched people play out in those transformations as security teams coming into companies and being successful to make that transformation. But then you have another piece in that Venn diagram of those that aren't that are just simply trying to add another tool or another layer or another capability on top of the way it currently is and milk every last dollar out of what they've built. And that's an organizational decision. It's a risk posture. It's a choice. And I think those are probably gonna see much worse recompense over the next couple of years. um, I did see an interesting stat the other day, and I'll have a slide for this that I'm going to be doing a talk on. But Microsoft was seeing that while the initial access is starting to be on the similar curve of growth and attack, that the actual ransomware detonations were getting a drop overarchingly. And then to add to that, anecdotally, a few of my friends in the CTI group I'm in are incident responders that do kind of freelance incident response at parts of
Mm.
DFAR teams, and they've been begging for work. They're like things are down, and you see that while you also see a slew of new victims showing up on pages, right? So I think it's that have nots continuing to play out again, where those that haven't taken those basic measures and gotten basic posture in place are getting pwned still. Those that aren't might have access or might have failures or BECs or things, but they're limited in their damage and they're quickly responded to. And they're starting to have that play out because of some of these things of focusing on the identity, focusing on the access, focusing on anomalies, using those type of things to help aid your security. And I'm obviously being a little more rhetoric than tactical, but you asked me what my thoughts are of where they're playing out. I think that's where we're starting to see is that have and have nots play out yet again. Um,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
going back to what I was talking about around SASE, just in general of secure access service edge or ZTNA principles. One of the key tenets of that is having an identity understanding, an
Right.
identity layer, and an identity of the assets, right? The 1.1s in CIS, the 2.1s in CIS, the to not get too nerdy. Anyways, I'll shut up. Let you ask questions again. I gotta take a
No.
sip of my coffee anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that was all great, and I think we're definitely seeing a lot of that with our MSP uh, division here as well. Like we go into a lot of places that are looking for our help, and it's a lot of the easier cases are when people are already driving towards that central identity
Yeah,
hosted in the cloud, and they're looking to leverage that stuff. Versus there's some people that just have everything is disparate, and they feel that there's more security with the more security tools or the more tools that they have.
yeah,
When
yeah.
in reality,
More beeps, more boops.
right,
Better off.
that's
Yeah,
just increasing surface attack area and just
sure.
surface area that you need to cover. And like, do you have the people power in order to like maintain all that, or
Knowledge,
would
not just
right?
people power, but knowledge, capabilities, operations,
Yeah,
tactics, all
exactly.
of those things.
Hmm. Hmm. And you kind of touched on it a little bit in the last one with the ransomware, but can you highlight some key threats that you see driving organizations to rethink, change their security approach?
Yeah, I mean, you see this like evolution of the market. For most people that don't know, the number one economy in the world is the United States still. We're growing at something like, I don't know, I haven't checked recently, but when I first did the talk for this, it was like 2.3% per annum. And China, number two, right? They're growing at like, I think it was 4 point something per annum. They've cooled slightly since then, but still growing at pretty good clip, right? Number
Hmm.
two. And number three was cybercrime, and it's growing at 15% per annum. Where's that coming from? The backs of hardworking Americans and citizens all over the globe, right? That's where this is coming from. It's just sheer loss. So people that bury their head in the sand and believe that the threats aren't happening, people aren't losing money, it's not occurring. It's just not true. You have business email compromises are probably your number one risk because they are so identity centric. That leads to ransomware in a lot of cases, but again, the actual encryption aspect of ransomware doesn't necessarily have to play out, right? People think of ransomware as my files were taken away from me, I can't use them, but extortion has become quite valuable in I'm going to release your data
Hmm.
or right or now next I'm going to go and call little Johnny's dad and let him know that we have the proof that Johnny's been talking about being abused at home, and we're going to release it out to the Facebook for his grandparents if they don't pay $500. Like this triple extortive aspect of this, right, where they're taking the data and then using it in another extortion methodology to just extract money. That's what it's for, right? It's
Yeah.
extracting money is the aspect of it. But I
And it's
think the
not just
thing's
from a
playing.
business sense. Sorry to cut you off. Not just from
No,
a
go.
business sense, but like the emotional aspect of it too is getting like
Oh,
played
don't
on
get
harder and
please don't.
harder. Just
Yeah, yeah, and it's getting worse, especially with things like sextortion scams that,
yeah.
that you're getting into, attacking kids. It's brutal, and so you're seeing that, and I think that's what happens in our world, not to get off on a tangent, Colt, but is we often see death must predicate change in our world. And I do a talk around cars and the automobile industry, and I put up a slide with four dates. Right, it's 1897, 1920, 1925, 1965, and 1966, and it might be 1950 actually in the middle date. But the point is, they come up, and I ask the audience, like, what do these dates mean? And nobody ever gets it right. And the car was invented in 1897, and it was 1950 was the second date, 1897, and we changed the landscape of cities, right? We stopped living within a mile of where we're going to be born and die, and started having suburbs because we could drive there and drive back into our jobs, and it created the change in our world, especially post-war, and again second post-war, right, with further expansions. But the first seatbelt wasn't freaking patented until 1950.
Yeah.
We don't think about that, and it wasn't until 1965 when Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed and drove change in the automobile industry that in 1966 NHTSA was formed, right? In the beginning of car safety and impact zones and crush zones, and having to have testing and making sure that my car's not going to kill me in just a random accident, my airbag won't go off and kill me, and recall processes and all those things that got built. And there's an interesting chart called death per billion miles traveled, and it shows the death in automobiles per billion miles that were traveled, and it started in the 1800s, and it goes at the very top of the chart at a very high percentage, and it finally normalizes around at about a tenth of that percentage in 1980 or so, after all of that change. But my point is, it's not until we see physical death and loss that occurs. Well, now with a lot of these scams, you are seeing suicides, you're seeing healthcare losses, you're seeing things play out that become big. Okay, not to get off on a macabre aspect, but that does drive that change. And as we see this more and more awareness, 13, 15 trillion, I think last I saw, dollars in cybercrime as a totality,
Hmm.
including those extortion scams and
Right.
scams in general and all those things. Um, it's just massive. So that's one aspect. Business email compromise then leading to ACH or
Mm.
wire fraud. Wire
Hmm.
transfer fraud is another big one for businesses right now. And that attacks both your failure in technical controls, but also your failure in your administrative controls, typically, right, in some form or fashion. So you see that playing out. I think the other thing to think about this year is just this massive contextualization of your information about your identities that becomes absorbable by LLMs for threat actor targeting. So I think spear phishing, I think targeted attacks that are easy to scale are going to be more and more common. Um, I think additionally, when it comes to the ransomware and the identity side too, both of those again have that have and have nots. Like
Right.
if you think about like me reducing my attack infrastructure of what could be ransomed and taken away from me, and me being able to apply systemic level like identity and encryption capabilities across assets that I do have control of, that changes things a lot, right? Because now you have to go be Colt on Colt's device to read this data that you just stole. And so you have some of that extortive response dropping from that, or capability dropping. Um, Anyways, I'll pause for you to get a question in edgewise, but
Yeah.
those are some of my initial thoughts of what people are going to struggle with this year.
Yeah, and that identity centrism, I think just that reduction in surface attack area is the biggest thing. It's much less to continuously monitor, also a lot easier to just, yeah, monitor,
Well,
really.
and to get a little technical, Colt,
Mhm,
and you can cut this part out if it's too nerdy for the crowd, but um, if you're using principles like zero trust, network architecture, ZTNA, and
mhm,
trying to bring things behind, like I must sign in with my identity must be verified on a device that's trusted, and then and only then can I access this resource, right? So you're using those type of principles, right, to keep it less nerdy. So you're using that type of principle. Um, that allows you to say you can assess the posture of a device and a human before allowing them access to data, right?
mhm,
And even then, I'd love to be able to burn that session if I no longer trust Colt, right? If that's no longer Colt, if that token has been used somewhere else and replayed and I see something changed and I don't trust it anymore, I want to be able to say that's not Colt anymore and I want to no longer trust that session and terminate it, right? And so it's this ability to say once I get very identity centric and device centric and understand those devices, I can do that. Over here, I can't. Like if I'm not aware of where the identity, I can't centralize on that and look at patterns, and I can't tie it to one thing. Then I just can't. I can't start there. It's much harder. And in fact, I was part of a CSA ZT working group. I'm dumbest member and probably least participatory lately, but of the group. And I asked this question after they just got done writing 176 pages about how to convert brownfield technology, like we talked about earlier, brownfield
mhm.
being those old servers, things like
Yep.
that, over to ZT-ZTNA principles. And they talked about stakeholders and work streams and having the understanding, like getting buy-in and looking at change control and interrupting business flow and planning cutover and all these things, like that side of it. And I said, y'all, what if I was this company I described earlier? What if I was that very identity centric, cloud and SaaS centric, infrastructure as code, CI/CD pipelines that are modern, that tie directly into those function services, tie directly into those deployment models that allow me for a modern approach to how I develop code if I am a code producing entity? What if I'm one of those? And we did have like 2 days worth of discussion essentially, and came down with one paragraph that I got to write that basically said, "You can kinda start right here and take it with a grain of salt the last 176 pages. And you
Sure.
can start workflow by workload and moving those over to using those already existing identity principles, using those already existing device posture principles, and moving forward with having access control." Now I'm
Yeah.
rounding off a lot of edges for
Right.
anybody listening
Right,
to
right,
this
right.
that's it's saying DevSecOps and all those things that I just am not the expert in. But I would say that piece of that shift is so fundamental in why that makes you faster at the security side of it to apply these principles and say, even though I'm not going to stop every threat, like again, looking back at the token smith capabilities, but by God, I'm going to know where our battle lines are and know where we need to line up and shoot each other. And I think that aligns with a much more scalable type of warfare in my mind. Americans won the revolution because we decided to shoot behind trees, right? Like, so it's kind of one of those things where we're forcing it back into lines where we can have bigger guns and we can have a very different approach to this. And maybe I'm being a starry-eyed schoolboy on this, but I believe that's where we are heading if from a ZT and what that does for us from a security perspective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree. And on that point, yeah, a lot of the topology already exists. So that transition, very Johnny Cash, and just one piece at a time. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but it is going to
exactly.
cost you a couple dimes, unfortunately,
You're
in
not
most
wrong.
cases.
It's significantly inflated since those times. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that was great. I appreciate all your input on that. Um, Going back to the brownfield technology, what are some major limitations right now? And I know we've touched on this a good bit throughout, but just wanted to have like a section where we kind of
Yeah,
badmouth the brownfield. Like what
sure.
limitations of those security models like really stick out to you, specifically in relation to like hybrid or cloud models?
Oh, geez. So the hybrid don't. So I actually was Mr. Anti-hybrid. Like I know I'm coming from an SMB MSP world that served that 500 user or less environment for the most part, but I just refused to hybridize. And it was great. I went to an engineering airlift last year with Microsoft, and I'm going back this year as well. And a gentleman stood up on the stage and said, "If you still have infrastructure in your environment, it is no longer defendable." He didn't say defensible, right? Defensible would be like I could argue that it's a good thing. He said you just can't protect it. Like his argument was you just can't. And I think he was being a bit hyperbolous, but the point is if I use my Active Directory as the source of truth and my Active Directory is compromised by one of a billion ways, then that now permeates to my identity that should be the virgin identity that we're talking about in the scenario across the chasm.
Hmm.
Instead, you built a crappy rope bridge across the chasm and said, man, we're good. So I think to your point, the limitations of brownfield is it often predicated having to be hybridized to your cloud approach and make the source of authority your local cloud, your local Active Directory, I say, right?
Hmm.
Or your other identity. I'm not going to be like that guy. There are probably some other models that people have approached, but the point being is that you're using something as that source of truth that I can compromise by local methods of LLMNR poisoning or other
Yeah.
hands-on keyboard methodologies that exist locally that allow me to try to take over and then give access and kind of shoot behind a tree, right? And I think that's the point is the brownfield technology often predicates that. Um, yeah, I might have lost my camera. There, it came back. All right, huzzah, we're back.
Oh, good.
Um, so, but to your point of why? Well, it's because most of the ways you're deployed were born in that era.
Hmm.
Right? It's you may have a Linux farm, and then this would, deviate from that statement. But if you're 100% Windows, then you're tied to Active Directory because that server needed something to bind to. And in Microsoft's infinite wisdom, they wanted to drive Azure use, in my opinion, and decided not to allow you to bind AD or servers to AADJ in the early days. And still, I think maybe even to the point of this filming, we had to use what was called AADDS, and we had to use it against the EULA to do what I did, right? To go and make the cloud the center of identity. Back to brownfield, it's also those servers and the server-based applications that don't translate well to
Right.
infrastructure as services. And sometimes it's based on the decisions of the companies you're buying line of business software from, not just sometimes, almost always. When I was in a VCIO role, my first thing that I would do is go meet with the manufacturers of the software. This was a long time ago. Meet with the manufacturers of the software for my clients and ask them this: what is your go to cloud strategy? And if their answer ever involved a terminal server, I was done. Like we were moving to another world. It needed to be something that at that time would probably be .NET, right? Something that was running now, or HTML5 came along and made a big difference in a lot of that, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
the point being is like it was really how did they choose to go forward? And sometimes you're stuck, right? You're running something like Global Shop and you have to run here locally, or you're running a Av Manager 2000 that runs on SMB 1.0, or, a lot of those things dictate the decisions. And then it forces the organization to make a risk-based decision. And that risk-based decision is the risk of shutting off all my income right now, moving to software and having this expense that I haven't planned for. And even then, not really solving the problem because you were born in a different era.
Hmm.
And I think it's those that, in my opinion, have the prescience to try to pivot to what somebody born today would be starting with. I would at least understand my competitor's capabilities. And I would understand that my tech debt is the burden of being born early, having all this mass and inertia. And my responsibility as an executive in this organization is to be able to stay up with those times, right? Is to be able to move forward with that. And we saw this with the airlines in the last 3 years, right? A lot of their
Yeah.
infrastructural decisions have made real delays and real billions of dollars of loss in economic power
Within
and
the past year,
capability
shoot.
just in the last year. Yeah. And that's all because of tech debt. Like not all, but even if you get into the lawsuit between Delta and CrowdStrike and start
Mm.
looking at that aspect of it, Delta could have been an infrastructure as code and could have just rebooted servers. Instead, they have a server named Charlie, right? And pets versus cattle type model. So again, that brownfield, if you've never heard this, pets versus cattle, I was first exposed to this by Sunil Yu, but it's this understanding of pets are something we keep around forever, right? I'll take it to a doctor and pay 3 grand because it had a little limp, right? Like pets are something we keep around.
Hmm.
Cattle we shoot when they break a leg. like we look at it as a transactional relationship with those cattle, and I don't mean to be Greenpeace might shoot me over this one, so I'll apologize. But when we think about cattle, they are a commodity. They're meant to be a renewable
Commodity, right?
resource that come back, and we get another one. We grow them up out of calves. We make them into beef, right? Like, and when we look at pets, we don't. That's not what we keep them for. So comparing that to servers and things that we look at, we often treat those as cattle or as pets that must be brought back exactly as that. And to put it in technical terms, I have a server named SQL 01 that must be up, and a web front end called Dev 02 that must be up. And those are servers that must be, versus more of a cattle version would be infrastructure as code. It's going to spin up this resource and it'll be used for that, and this resource. And they're more in that model, right? So things that are ephemeral resources and more
Mhm.
thought that way. Well, if Delta had rebuilt and more modernized towards those concepts, then they would just turn the servers off and back on again, and they'd come back up as the next resource with that newer CrowdStrike version and been back and running. But when you're in a model where you have to bring Charlie back up, Charlie has to come back to life. I've had to bring Charlie back to life. He has to come back because he's SQL 01. Does that make sense? So you have, like, in
Yeah,
my opinion,
absolutely. You're looking.
modern concepts, and people can fight with me on this, and I'm certainly not the biggest expert in the delineation of service-based architectures and some of the things that come along with that. But I would say that if they had modernized, the impact would have been less. And some of that burden, in my opinion, is on the organization. I think we're going to see that more and more play out over time, either through loss through threat actors, loss through lawsuits, things in that nature.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like looking at your resources as commodities versus as your special little boys
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and girls, makes you just more agile. And then your BCDR also is
Oh,
that
yes.
the RTO RTP is gonna like drastically improve from that case. Well, let's talk about zero trust. It's been mentioned here a couple times. That's something
Okay.
near and dear to my heart. So I feel like where we're at currently with security, we're very quasi zero trust, not exactly 100% of the way there. It's become popular recent years. How does it being quasi zero trust, where we're at now, and true zero trust um, align with security monetization? Like, can you talk about that roadmap on what you think
Yeah.
we still have yet to do?
Well, first off, zero trust is a concept and can never be achieved, right? Like, at some point, you just can't zero trust away. Business has to be done. So I'll say it's a concept, it's an ideal, it's what we're trying to drive towards, and it has pillars that need to be executed, right, from that perspective, like just for that purpose.
Mhm.
That said, the concept is starting to have either again have or have nots, but
Yeah.
we'll focus on what is ZT and what are we talking about. Zero trust. John Kindervog, I guess, kicked this ball down the road, right, and wrote the book, the initial book, I guess, talking about it. Then you have 800. What is it? 800 207, I think is ZTNA. Anyways, SP 800 207. But ultimately, what is zero trust? It's this concept of saying, like, before we would always trust but verify, right? Like, I'm going to trust, but I'll make sure it's cold. Zero trust pivots to, like, trust but trust ephemerally, right? Is the way I would think about it if I was trying to, like, make an analogy for people, which is like, trust, but don't trust permanently. And even
Mhm.
then, trust only on the basis of what I need to trust, right? For the purpose, right? Limiting the blast radius. So I think it's just conceptually a restatement of what we should have been doing all along, which is like really verifying it. Like, trust and trust ephemerally. Like, you might be on the list to pick up your daughter today, but let's say you get a restraining order for beating your wife. Like, you shouldn't be able to pick up your daughter tomorrow. Like, that's
No,
potentially right. Like, that's
code's
needs to be
gone.
trust, but trust ephemerally, even though I know you're still you. And the conditions have changed. The trust of that
Mhm.
resource have changed.
It's
So
like the
what
keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, except now it's keep your friends at an arm's length and keep your enemies also at an arm's length.
That's exactly the way I would look at it. And it really is a focus on the data, right? And when we think about what is zero trust is talking about access to sensitive data.
Mm.
Access to data that means something to this organization, means something contractually, means something regulatorily, that means something from an intellectual property perspective, right? Whatever it may be that this is sensitive or valuable, it's access to that. And the real question is that Colt? And should Colt have access to this? And it goes all the way back to the very core tenets of security, right? The IAAA, which is identity, authentication, authorization, and auditing, right? Is that Colt, right? Has he authenticated? That is that really him? right? Authorization. Should he have access to this hallway? Like, we keep nuclear secrets here, right? And then auditing. Did he take nuclear secrets? Right? Like, it really is that. And yet we're trying to like separate that from what we do perfectly well thought out in the physical world.
Mhm.
And when we get into this, what is ZT? ZT is this: is that a person that should be here? Is that the right person? Are they on the right device? Are they in the right posture? Have they been compromised? Right. And then same thing plays out for counterintelligence. Is Colt stealing information? Is he egressing information? Is he an insider threat? Has he been compromised? Because an insider threat could just be Colt being compromised, right, from a threat actor. Whether that be from any of the methodologies in mice or actual digital compromise. So, yeah, I'll hush for a sec, but
Or yeah, I could have just been fired, and I'm really grumpy, and my none of my access got flipped over, none of my authorization
yeah,
got flipped
poor
over at that time.
practices.
Right.
That's it, and that is the other thing is there's such a gap in hygienic aspects of this that shifts. One of the things we haven't talked about is what moving over to this other half kind of world means is that everything can be API. I can start automating a lot of things. I can start taking and using modern kind of concepts to say, if Microsoft's identity is compromised, please go turn off access and refresh tokens, remove tokens, kill access to this platform that we don't have control over. Make sure that he can't access anything in the financial system over here with this SaaS. You could orchestrate all that. That's mostly API capable.
Mhm.
Skim provisioning, deprovisioning over to the SaaS resources, like that's very centric and capable. Like I can just turn off your access almost instantaneously, and I can do it without necessarily a human process. As soon as they flip you to disabled in HR to stop paying you, because guess what? When people like want to not like be there, they stop paying them, and and then that core tenancy turns off your access. Holy crap! What a world! And so you start getting into a much less complex and very normalized control plane of units, which means people can build products and ISVs can build capabilities that make that very easy to do and very easy to monitor. And so I think that another part of that have and have nots is too many variables over here. If you
Mhm.
don't believe me, server 2008, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16, 19, force function, 03, 08, 08R2, 12, 12, right? Like there's many variables. Which virtualization platform? How's it structured? How much speed? What kind of capabilities? Do we have like all of those things? Brownfield brings billions of variables where going down this API centrism limits that variable field into a more manageable state from a scale and automation perspective, right? Too many
Mhm.
things would break here. Too many things I can't make a product and sell it to you that meets all of the conditions for all the variables. But over here I can, because it's just Graph API, right? Or it's just Okta, or it's just Salesforce, or it's just blank, right? Okay.
Yeah, at that point, like the simplification, you're going to have less stuff that's falling through the cracks, and like the better you can keep up your security hygiene, the better you're going to be um, moving forward, and just the maintenance, management, and monitoring all those three
Scalable.
M's. Yeah,
Yep. It's
yeah,
scalable.
scalability, and then also the agility to be able to scale at that
Yeah.
while still
And something
maintaining the same
breaks, it
level of effort.
breaks. And if something breaks, it breaks systemically.
Hmm.
Right? And I can fix that. I can go, oh man, this API is not working anymore. Oh, they changed it, you sorry bastards. And then everybody's back up. Right? Like, and it does have that systemic ebb and flow that plays out. It has its downsides to that too, right? There's systemic failure that causes problems too, but it does
That
allow
can
us
be
a more
accounted for.
scalable and manageable.
Yeah, that can be accounted for. Backups can be put in place. The introduction of high availabilities in certain cases, but I mean, sure, you're going to have things that still slip through, but it's going to be a
Yeah.
lot easier to dive in, pinpoint like problem right there,
Yes, that's my
right
point.
there. Yep, beautiful. That was great. So branching off that a little bit, we're going to get something to near and dear to my heart, and also we touched on it a little bit earlier today. SASE, SASE,
Yeah.
the Secure Access Service Edge. For our listeners that might not be the most familiar, could you explain how SASE implements or looks to implement zero trust? I guess SASE
Yeah.
as a whole too. Get a little background there.
I think SASE obviously it's a Gartner term of a compilation of secure web gateway and identity and access and SIM and EDR and all. Yeah, sure, good, gotcha,
KSB, all
awesome.
that fun stuff.
Yeah, all the things, and it's great. What it to me is the way we would have to build our world if we were identity centric and didn't have castles and moats to protect in the same way. Because what does it do? It allows me to have a place that I do everything in a central location that is cloud centric and scalable and many points of presence and speed and all those things that make up for having a stupid firewall and an asynchronous cable modem running in a location somewhere out in BFE. And now I'm just going to a cloud, and everything egresses out through that web gateway, and everything egresses out through those certificate and inspection points, and everything egresses out to those authentication methods, which means now I can limit the consumption at the other end to only from those IPs or from those ranges or from those certificates or from those things, which allows me to take my attack surface and reduce it. And I think this is probably a good call out is, what is the difference between attack surface and protect surface? Do you know that answer? Or have you heard me go down this path, Colt?
I've not heard you talk down this path. No, I'm excited.
I was in a meeting with, and it was John Kindervog talking, and he said, listen, let's talk about this. Protect surface is everything you own. I have to protect all of my children, whether I love them equally or not. I have to protect all of them. That is my protect surface. But if I choose to hold a kid out the window, that's my attack surface now. I've chosen to make it. And he didn't say it in these exact words. But the point is, protect surface is everything. Attack surface is what I choose to expose. It's the things that can be attacked. It's what I must protect that is exposed, that's out in that space. And so when we talk about attack surface management and posture management, ASPM, all those things and terms that come from it, they come from this choice of that I've exposed. Well, ZT, SASE, and other concepts in that nature try to limit where and what is exposed.
Mhm.
If I limit the path for you to sign into a service behind a zero trust tunnel that must exist, it's very hard to attack that. My new attack surface becomes this one common point at the identity layer. I'm moving more and more of those attack surfaces back to the sheer identity layer that is meeting some of those concepts of ZTNA and zero trust of identity and ZT in general, zero trust concepts. So in my mind, it's this pivot of things from the attack surface to make them not your attack surface, but still in your protect surface, but no longer part of that attack surface in the same way, right? We're pivoting where that attack surface is. If I cannot sign into this SaaS without going through SSO, and that SSO must come from this certificate that can only come from this SASE edge or VPN if they use it that way. There's more and more going towards TLS tunnels and things that get a lot faster and manageable that have some gives and takes in that regard. But it allows you to see and shift that attack surface back to that identity layer. And if you think about what like the way 802.11 is at least technically asking it to be written and implemented at ZTNA is having a third-party SPA or a single point. Oh gosh, hold on. Let me make sure I'm not messing these up. Single packet authorization that has to go first to the controller, the policy enforcement point that says, oh yeah, he would have authenticated. That is probably going to be fine. Now let's open up authentication for Colt to authenticate. Oh, now he is. Now let's open up the tunnel. I can't just attack over here. I have to go through here, make the handshake, make the second handshake, do the secret knock, kick 5 times, turn sideways. Right. So you're getting into, and then at the same time, to be able to even do that, I might have to have a certain posture. AV must be running, EDR must be functional. I must have encryption on my device. You can now set some of those postures on access and predications of those accesses in that way. And you're shifting a lot of that attack surface back and controlling where we have our battle lines in the way I would describe it in my mind.
So it's not necessarily even just like making sure that the identity is true, but also the medium in which the identity is looking to access. So
which then allows you to take it a little further with SASE to, in that central point, be way more effective at your inspection, be more normalized in the way the logs are coming in, be more manageable at this one point of where I'm going to do those battles, if you will, right? And so bringing the secure web gateway there now means I have the same experience at home as I did in the office. Bringing the VPN there to access resources means I have the same experience as I do everywhere else, to bring it down to like normal terms, right? Bringing my access control there means it's more centralized and I can have a more uniform experience and speed to adding a user and having their stuff just work. Like it's a lot of those concepts, but a lot of them are just being moved to a more appropriate place for modern times. Again, and there's people that already are very identity centric that'll have an easy adoption of that. And those that are not, that will have to go through either more expensive methodologies or will have to do things like, I'm gonna have to put in a tunnel device inside the network so that I can bring the connections back into the office to hit these 3 like it's just stuff you'll have to live with. And that's because you have those things, right? So
yeah, our CEO back in 2023 was asking me like why I was so big on this push for SASE. He's like, how's it going to be different than like legacy VPNs are currently today? I was like, well, it's going to, for a single connection, going to be providing a similar level of security, but
Yep.
the agility and scalability that we're going to have for protecting everything that's in the cloud is where
Yeah.
our big benefit's going to be.
Yeah, yeah,
I
you're
think that's a
controlling
great.
your exit point for CASB and controlling your exit point for so many things, and as much as you can enforce that and force the users through that space in a way that's reasonable and makes sense and scalable for them and makes their job get done, ooh, chef's kiss. It's 100% that, so
Agreed. Agreed. I did have another question on what would some benefits be that an organization could expect from implementing a zero trust solution, but zero trust SASE solution. But I feel like we've covered that. So unless you have
yeah.
something you'd like to add, but
No, I think there's something I would add to it of
sure.
it's not just about let's focus on the positive, and I do love that. Those are the benefits they're gonna get, right? They're gonna get more scalable infrastructure, better user experience, better overall security posture, right? All the things.
Mhm.
Even in some ways, they're gonna get a makeup for some of their tech debt because we can bolt it on as a way to backfill some of that, right? Like, that's one of the benefits of this is you can add in those ZT front ends that allow you to kind of make it a little bit harder to use this service, right? I do that with a lot of my personal services. They're all done
You
with
want like
ZT
the
front
LAN
end.
zero trust you talking about?
Yeah,
Like
kind of
local
like
area
taking
networks?
yeah, where you're bringing stuff back to the servers and dealing with that brownfield a little bit where you have to
Sure.
and bringing in agents to kind of change the way you reach that. So now you don't have as much lateralization risk.
Hmm.
But I also want to focus on like the have-nots. Like one of the things that I'm saying in my predictions this year is like not everybody has to survive, y'all. We don't like let's stop looking at this like everybody's going to make it. They're not. Like at the end of the day, that's the benefit of this. That's how rebirth works in capitalism. There are people that made steam engines for way too many months after they converted to internal combustion. There are
Hmm.
people that didn't take those changes seriously and are no longer making cars. General Motors bought up like 40 car dealers or something, or 40 car manufacturers. I'm being hyperbolous, but it was a bunch because they could buy them at a fire sale because they couldn't keep up, couldn't change, couldn't scale, couldn't deal with those things. We're really, I think, in my mind at that world, and it's being exposed by AI. When you start thinking about people trying to use LLMs and those that have garbage in, garbage out, those that have great data posture versus those that suck, like what a difference in their world in 3 years from that use versus the world that was much more forward thinking. So
Hmm.
the piece I'd leave people with is all you have to do is start focusing on trying to be where your competitors should start tomorrow. Like, let that sink in. That's your goal is to get where somebody starting tomorrow would have because of their being born in this modern world post 2017-ish, let's call it. Right. And I think if you're in that latter category, the former category that's already been in business, that's doing great, has tons of infrastructure, it's going down this path. I would focus on how do I get to those capabilities where I can actually secure like somebody starting tomorrow would. Like they have no tech debt. They can just start right now
Hmm.
with modern principles if given the right advice.
Right. Yeah. 100%. And like continuing on that, like I think let's just get a little more forward thinking here. 5, 10 years. Um, what do you see the cybersecurity landscape as? Like, where do you see SASE fitting in that? Like, what does the change look
I
like?
think, if you took it to 10, I don't matter. I
Mm.
genuinely mean that. I think the only reason people doing what I do need to exist is because of a immature market.
Sure.
And I think if we were to fast forward, enough of capitalism and other market conditions will have played out that those that have gotten that posture that could just simply defend themselves and scale and respond to an incident and reduce its impact and move forward and be resilient, like just basic crap, and they're going to be fine. And cyber will just be part of what we do for IT and delivery of information systems. Like it won't be some separate entity. I don't think that can be the case. We can't be like, no, I'm not in cars. I do mechanics. Like, no, it's just part of like there's mechanics
Same, same.
support aspect of it. There's the dealership aspect of it that sells it. There's sometimes a combination of those two. Like, when you get into those things, I think it's just more normalized as an industry.
Mhm.
Um, Part of my talk is that we always build and take advantage of the tech before we think about its impact in regulating and managing it. Right. And it's this understanding that I'd rather sit in my boxers in the AC when it's hot outside and watch TV than I would have no air conditioning. And so I don't care about chloroflora, whatever the heck you want to call them. We'll deal with that later. And so like you just build it. And same thing with steam engines. They blew up and killed people. And with automobiles, and we never had lockout procedures in factories until people lost arms, and we didn't have exit bars on doors until 300 women burned to death in a factory. Right. And so we don't often take technology from a security first perspective. But also later you would no more consider an architect that has to go talk to an architect security guy that makes sure the house is going to stand up. It's just part of being the architect, boss. Like, but right now we call that IT versus security. How's that?
Hmm.
How's that separable? Like, how's that delineable? I would also say that as the continuance of APIs, and the normalization of application programming interfaces, agent centrism or agentism, I suppose, with LLMs and AI, you're going to see a big change to have and have nots, to where I just don't think we'll have a lot of the people with the tech debt. Like at some point, you're not like, I'm the last steam engine repair guy. Like it's just, okay, good. Like the four engines a year. I'm teasing a bit. There's obviously still
It's a
operable
good
steam
talking
engines.
point at parties, I guess, at that point, though. I mean,
Yeah, you're like, bro, I'm the last whistle changer. I just so
uh-huh.
you know. Um,
I don't know
but
how many
anyways, I,
ferroequinologists we have on here, but
nice. I would also though add that I think going forward, this is the natural transformation of all technologies, is that eventually it does become to where we're an acceptable level of deaths, and that'll never go away, and we will have loss. It'll always be part of it. Risk is risk. And it's one of those things where that does play out. 10 more years also, I think you won't be able to file a business application without having some level of basic considerations for security posture in play. Right now, you could start up a new startup, build software, and really suck at your CI/CD pipeline I talked about. You could
mm,
really have one dude. Like we just saw a total DRP or DLP manufacturer get popped because they were running an agent. They let somebody sign into their Google Chrome upload process for the Google store. They were able to upload and uploaded a malicious version of it, right? And stole tons and tons of stuff out of that. So there's just, the point is that capitalism hasn't yet done its thing. And I have a theory I use called the middle theory. It's just something I created. It's very simple, of saying that basically products, goods, and services never rise much above or fall very much below the maturity of the consuming entity. Meaning that essentially, I wouldn't get rewarded to make a better spoon if you don't give a crap about my better spoon. You're not going to pay me more for it. So why would I put
mhm.
extra expense into it? And similarly, if I made a crappy spoon that cut your face and someone made one that didn't, and it was next to me, and your maturity was, I don't like cuts in my mouth from my spoon, you're going to buy the non-cutty mouthy one for the same price, and I'll go away. And so when you think about that, the consuming entity, when it comes to software risk and how their processes, what security my vendor has as a posture, that was zero. No one cared. Even in the enterprise world, it was a checkbox activity, right? You let somebody fill out their own answers to the form and you never look at it. Like you're just a checkbox. You just want to feel good that they've done it. It's just this, maybe there's some contractual things in place if you're really, in good shape. But
I think that might
ultimately,
still
it's really
be.
just, yeah, trust exercise.
Yeah.
Um, so that said, is I think that as we continue to move forward, that those will have higher and higher impacts on business. The maturity of that consumer is modern, right? The way you think of things is different than we thought 10 years ago, at least for me. And
Absolutely.
and I think that's going to drive a lot of change, and the maturing entity will drive up capitalism, will require people to have better processes, require people to have more than just their SOC 2 that means nothing, right? They'll actually have to mean it and do it and hold that trust. And as that changes, you'll see a beautiful thing that happens in capitalism. It always corrects. It always does. It may hurt first, but it always corrects, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, you, Matt, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Been talking here for plenty good time. I want to, yeah, thank you very much again for your time. For all those listening, you can find Matt at cybermattlee.com, and with a very hilarious face on the splash page. If you'd like to see more about that cloud in the back that says pax8.com or pax8, you can go to pax8.com, where he is the Senior Director of Security and Compliance, as we talked about in the intro. I am Colton Rodgers with Xeris. You can find us at Xeris.com, spelled Zirous.com. Matt, any closing words for our friends and folks?
No, I just appreciate you doing this and trying to raise the tide. I think it's part of this halves side of the world that we both see very positively, and I'm just glad to be on the same mission, man. So thanks for doing what you're doing. Appreciate you having
Awesome.
me on.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right.